It is a lovely finish on this model. Hornby have captured the subtle details pretty well. It really is a no expense spared model, and it does feel that way when you hold it with all that weight, all the die-cast metal, and a lot of separately fitted parts. Well, hello there. It is amazing to see you, and I do hope that I find you well. I'm Jenny Kirk, welcome you up here to Weir Yard, and today we're talking about a model that had a recent release from Hornby. There was a bit of a surprise because they announced that they were doing an all-new tooled 9F, and the modelers at large were, it's not what we would have picked. Certainly that's an interesting choice. But Hornby nailed their colours to the mast on this one and pulled out all the stops to give us something really special. And it's the latest release of the 9F that we're going to be taking a good close look at today. But before we get into this video, I'd like to ask a huge favour. If you really enjoy what you see, then do please hit that like button and consider sharing this video to maybe help out another modeler and show them just what we find today during the review. And if you haven't already done so, then do please subscribe to the channel, and it's a really great way of keeping up to date on the new video content that we put out, and it also is a great help to us as well. But the 9F's certainly something that is well represented in preservation. They did quite well out of being saved, probably helped by the fact that they were some of the last steam locomotives built for mainline use. And that meant when they were withdrawn, it was an almost criminal amount of life that was left in them. It was quite wasteful on resources, but that probably meant that they were in particularly good condition for being saved. Evening Star was saved by the National Railway Museum, earmarked as the final steam locomotive built by British Railways. But another 9F that passed from the ownership of British Railways directly into preservation is the one that the model is based on today, and that is Black Prince, bought by the artist David Shepherd off the back of a very successful exhibition of some of the paintings that he'd done of wildlife out in Africa, and it raised him enough money that he was able to go to British Railways and say, I want to buy a real full-sized locomotive. And it was a 9F that they offered to him, so it passed straight from British Rail ownership into his ownership and on into the preservation scheme, and has put in a sterling performance ever since. Now, 9Fs also hold a dubious reputation as being the final steam locomotive to be scrapped from British Railways. Indeed, in the early 1980s, the supply of scrap railway wagons dried up for the Die Woodham's scrapyard in Barry, and to keep his men busy, they started scrapping some of the steam locomotives that were still there. And it was a 9F that was one of the two that got the chop. And in many ways, that was probably the shot in the arm that the preservation movement needed to have at the time, to realise that these locomotives weren't going to be there forever, and they were still technically on the chopping block, so it did make sure that the rest of the locomotives that were there were able to be saved. And luckily the supply of scrap wagons came back, so that after Die Woodham's men came back after the weekend, they had something else, something easier to be able to break apart, and no more steam locomotives were torched. But thanks to Hornby sending over a review sample today, we're able to take a good close look at the all-new tooled Hornby 9F and see, really, does it live up to all of the promises? Is this the definitive 9F model in 00? Let's take a look. Today's video is sponsored by TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for finding all of the models featured today at the best possible price at the link in the description. TMC also offers custom weathering and renumbering to any model, be it brand new or pre-owned. Check out their full pre-owned listings too, where you can be assured of quality as every item is screened and graded by professional staff. TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for all aspects of modelling. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
One of the models that I get asked to review an awful lot is the all-new tooled Hornby 9F, and I'd like to thank Hornby for actually making that possible by very kindly sending a review sample in for us to take a good close look at. And the model that they've actually sent is that of Black Prince, one of the preserved 9Fs, and actually it's a locomotive that passed straight into preservation from BR service. Previously, Hornby has had a 9F in their range going right back through to the 1970s on and off. And the previous iteration was quite an interesting choice by Hornby that they did. They tooled up for the crusty boilered examples, which were a very distinctive variant of the 9F and ones that hadn't been offered ready to run before. But it came as quite a surprise that they would choose that. But they have added to their range this all-new tooled 9F that owes nothing in its heritage to any previous model. So I'm really excited to be able to take a look at this. Now it's 21 pin ready. We've got that here on the box so that at the time of purchase you know exactly what you need to buy. And we're going to be doing a full DCC fit of this later on using the Trainomatic 21 pin decoder. And if you really want to make sure that the performance is perfect, if you are a little bit worried about running it over, say, Insulfrog points, or maybe you don't quite trust your track work, then as an option you can also get one of the Trainomatic Stay Alives, which are quite easy to solder on and just give that little bit extra performance. So we're going to be giving you full details of how to fit that later on in the video. The model that Hornby have very kindly sent over a review sample of is R30351, and this is the newest release, and this is as 92203 Black Prince, suitable for Era 11. Now, it's one of only a few 9Fs that were named. I believe in actual service only Evening Star was officially named, but Black Prince has become one of the more well-known of named examples. The box is actually very different to previous Hornby boxes. It's exactly the same as what the Black 5 has, and it's a good sturdy cardboard outer, and we've got all this information here, full potted history of the class and this specific example. We've got line drawings as well. And looking on here, we've got the original line drawings drawn in 2021. So it just shows how long these models are in gestation as they are developed. Getting the lid off is a little bit trickier than previous examples, but we can just get in there and pull that off. Inside we get this foam as well, which is actually quite useful for if you want to bury this in your landscape to get rid of it and make full use of it. This is actually quite good to hold plaster bandage whilst it sets. And the innermost clamshell is the more conventional thing that you're probably more used to. There's a little bit of paperwork, and as always this is just routine maintenance, but also some information on DCC fitting and where the separate parts go. Now, as a warning on some of these, the steps are something that if you've got fairly tight radius curves, then you might not be able to make use of these. And some of the front buffer beam detail, it's an either or with the front coupling, so really it's about your choice. We've also got a closer coupling mechanism, and this I do like on the Hornby ones because they're semi-permanently coupled together, the locomotive and the tender, but it gives you the option that if you remove a screw, just slide it along, there's actually two cutouts in the coupling bar, and it just allows that slightly closer coupling if you don't have tight curves on your layout. We've also got the information on DCC fitting, and this does include a pre-fitted speaker enclosure designed for the Hornby TXS HM7000 style decoder and the speakers that they use, which are actually quite an industry standard. So if you do choose to go your own way on speaker installation, then it is a fairly standard speaker and it should just be a perfect fit in there. Sliding the model out of the clamshell, we get extra detail here, which includes brake rigging for the tender. We've also got some etched nameplates there that say Black Prince. Now these are pre-printed onto the model, but if you want etched plates you don't need to buy these as an extra part. They are provided for you, and a really nice finish on those. We also get a driver and fireman figure. These are pre-painted. And those aforementioned extra detail parts too. Very carefully just slide the locomotive out. Now do remember that locomotive and tender are actually coupled together. We've got that solid bar, so there's no real risk of putting a strain on these wires that go between. I'll just turn this over, but we've got the wires that go over to this plug underneath. And you just need to be a little bit careful with that, not to pull on these because they can pull out. But that coupling bar does make it all but impossible to actually stress that cable. And you're not going to accidentally have a situation where the coupling can come undone because it's not secured and you find yourself unknowingly pulling your entire train by that cable, which can happen with other designs. Now the weight on this model is actually quite astounding. This is definitely much heavier than previous models that Hornby have had going back to the 1970s of the 9F. It is a locomotive drive. Again, that's something that some of the very early ones had, a tender drive with a freewheeling locomotive. There's none of that going on here. We've got all 10 wheels are driven, and they're driven from the second from last wheel set. You can just see the bump there where the gear train would be. And I'm just looking down there. I got told off actually because I made a mistake on a previous video about which wheels a locomotive was picking up from. And looking at this, we've got phosphor bronze wiper pickups on that axle, missing out that axle, and then that axle and that axle. We've also got wiper pickups that play onto the backs of the first and last wheels on the tender. So this should actually run quite well without needing anything like a stay alive. If you want peace of mind, there's plenty of space in there to fit that in. Now looking into the actual design of the tender itself, let's just start there. We do have this moulded coal load, and Hornby are definitely getting a lot better with these. This actually does look pretty good. You can put a smattering of coal dust over the top if you wish, and you can very carefully hook that out. So this plastic insert is removable, so if you want to add your own coal load, then we've got a fully modelled chute in there, and you could have it with maybe just a small amount of coal down at the bottom if you choose, or you can actually fill it right up. And this just gives you a nice option if you don't want to mess about with crushed real coal. And that actually clicks in quite well. There's no movement of that, which is good. It's a nice positive fit. This is the BR standard 1G tender. They had a number of different designs, but this is in keeping with the tender which Black Prince has ended up with in preservation. We've got a lovely satin finish on the black. It's a really nice realisation of the colour. One of the things that I do find is that sometimes the X-Works gloss doesn't work in model form, and nor would completely matte. That, I think either of those would look a little bit silly, and this satin really is nicely done. We've also got a really nice crisp realisation of the ferret and dartboard crest on there. That's actually really quite shiny, just looking there. We've got some great definition of the detail on there. Even though that's over the rivet detail, it does look nice and crisp and clean. We've got the additional detail here down near the bottom into the chassis with the outside frames, with the roller bearing covers picked out in yellow with the red there. Just says Timken if you're wondering. The leaves on the springs as well have that slightly splayed look at the ends, which is exactly what real springs look like. They're not actually as neat as some realizations in model form would show you. So that really is well done there, and I do like this really quite chunky and sturdy assembly that holds the axle boxes in place with the flange detail and the rivets. We've then also got the correct cutouts in the chassis, so flat along the bottom and then with this arched top and oval ends. I'm not 100% sure what this is, but looking on the pictures, that is fully accurate with the full-sized locomotive. And I do like these steps as well. I think these are made of plastic, but they are nice and robust in there, with a great deal of three-dimensional detail with the kind of elongated circle cutouts at the back. Looking to the back of the tender, we've got the red buffer beam, all that extra rivet detail. We've got metal turned, I think this is a brass material, turned heads. They're really nice actually, and they've got that slight dished shape to the actual faces. The shanks and the recesses that they slide into, the springs are quite there's a decent amount of spring to them, but not excessive, not too weak either. And you can just see on there, we've got that little plate that bolts on top of the real ones. Really nicely done with that kind of checker plate design. Up the back, we've got a, I'm not sure whether that is metal or plastic. It actually does have quite a spring to it. And they're actually, yeah, just confirmed. BR1G1520 on there. That's the number of gallons. So I'm guessing that's the actual running number of the tender itself. And there you have water capacity. I can just read 5,000 gallons. And again, this sort of checker plate of rivet detail really is nice. Moving further up, we've got the dome and the filler at the back. There's a lot of separately fitted metal handrails. These really are nice and robust. They're well on there. And again, we've got these extra protrusions with the checker plate effect. That is really crisp and sharp and nicely done. Looking back across the coal hopper, I like the kind of surround on that. I'm trying to think of the proper name for that. It's almost like a baffle that holds the coal in. That's all part of the same moulding, but again, really nice crisp rivet detailing on that. The front of the tender, we've got flush glazing in these little tiny side windows, and all the locker details are really quite fine. They're just etched into the tooling, so they appear as almost line art on there, but it really does look good. And then we've got the separately fitted handbrake levers, and you can see there as well. Actually, no, that must be for the water scoop. So yes, you can see underneath we've got the water scoop on there. And then we've also got the controls all written out there. So pick up out and in. And then we've got the little tray there that the coal comes out onto, so that the firemen can actually get a shovel in and shovel it across into the firebox. And then we've got the handbrake just here on the other side, again nicely picked out with the red. And I do like that checker plate at the bottom. That is actually metal, And then further down, there's kind of like a weird gap on the 9F. And then you've got the front buffer beam exactly as per prototypes. They have strange connections between the locomotive and tender, something I always notice when you see the real locomotives up close. Now, turning to the locomotive itself, one of the things I would say is, if I get the box back, I'll just see if I can show you this. The picture on the box art has very shiny rods and shiny tyres, and that doesn't really show the model at its best. But I want to assure you that when you look at the model itself, we've got these chemically blackened wheels and motion, and this actually does look so much better than the box art picture. The wheels themselves, we've got correct spoke patterns on there, and then we've got, correctly for the locomotive, flanged for the outer pairs, and the innermost is flangeless. That is as per prototype. I doubt that they've made smaller flanges on these wheels and these wheels as per the prototype. I don't think it would add anything in model form, and certainly you've got to think about its reliability of running. That Welshut's valve gear really is nicely done, correctly fluted metal rods. And the brake blocks are factory fitted, and actually on the locomotive, and actually I quite like this, it does actually acknowledge the fact that you're never going to see this upside down, so what's the point in the separately applied brake rigging? So we do have this quite nice moulded detail which doesn't compromise being able to get the keeper plate out, and I do quite like that. The front bogie setup is entirely as per the prototype. They always look really spindly in model form, but that is a metal casting, so it is quite robust. There's a reasonable amount of weight to that. Then we've also got a rendition on the front there of the spring detail. That is actually quite nicely well done. And then you've got this for the coupling, which does stick out a little way, but actually it's not too bad. The frames at the front are solid, but again, you're not really going to look at it from underneath. And this is all metal. Like I said before, there's a lot of weight to this. And one of the very, very eye-catching things about the 9F is they had a very large boiler, and that 210 wheelbase meant that the boiler and firebox have to be quite high up, because as you can see, we've got axles straight underneath. There's nowhere for them to fit in between in the frames. So that's one of the reasons that the 9F is so high, and we've got captured underneath the running plate that characteristic big gap of air, which is something which I suppose is one of the reasons why they went tender drive in the 70s for these, because there was nowhere to hide the mechanism. But on this, we've presumably got it up in this boiler, which again does feel there's a lot of metal gone into this. We've got the raked back cylinders, and again all of this motion is metal. We've got a kind of cast metal crosshead detail. Everything does look to be where it needs to be. It's complex but really quite slickly realised. Looking up across the boiler, we've got the correct profile of this. It's always a very peculiar shaped boiler. We've got the smoke box, and then the boiler kind of jumps outward a little bit. I suspect that that is covering the cladding underneath. And we've got all the pipe detail. The 9F can otherwise be a little bit of a bland looking locomotive, but actually Hornby have captured the subtle details pretty well on this. With the coppered coloured piping, really does stand out. The gunmetal on some of these fittings up here at the front. We've got the tiny squat dome, I suppose, just to try and keep it within the loading gauge. And then we've got turned brass safety valves here on the top. Looking further back, we've got this sort of twin rake backs on the front of the firebox, and that is realised really, really well to where we've got this valve set up. We've got the whistle on there. It's a very complicated part. On previous models, we've sometimes seen these just moulded as part of the boiler detail, but these are separately fitted parts, picked out in a kind of gunmetal colour, and really nicely done. On the side there, though, I'm just looking here. I'm just trying to look in quite close. I don't know whether that's a joggle or a brake. It's just something to keep an eye on. I'm going to look at that very closely off camera before I do the scores, but I'm just looking at it. It looks like it's cracked and been glued, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so I will check out in a bit. We've got sliding roof hatches on the locomotive, so these can be posed, and this does give an opportunity to be able to look in and see the backhead detail from above. Now this does appear to have a firebox flicker, and I will look at that when we get it running, but that backhead and cab detail really is exquisite. We've got all of the gauges, all of the separate pipework, everything's nicely picked out, and then we've got the correct design of the firebox door mechanism. It's actually quite complicated, and that looks good enough to work, though it is posed in the open position. And then just looking back down the other side, you can see we've got so much extra fitted detail in there, and the cab roof is quite thin as well. That feels like it's made of metal, and that's allowed for a nice scale thickness to it, which really is pretty good. Flush glazing on the sides and also on the front, with the edges picked out with a brass coloured paint. And then look at all that pipework. This is all separately fitted down the side. One of the things about the 9F is they were designed for ease of maintenance as well, so having all of these parts easily accessible really speeded up turnaround in works. The running plate is die-cast metal. I can feel that. There's a really good solid feel to this. And then looking to the front, we've got the shed code of 82F, and there's a lot of extra detail here. We've got the smokebox dart, separately fitted wire, extra wire handrails. Those hinges are nicely done too, and you can see down the side, it's really difficult to show you. It's quite a big model, just like the prototype, but these smoke deflectors are metal, really robust, and it really does capture that front face look well. I like these metal flanges as well. The front parts of the frames captured so nicely, and then this checker plate with the cutouts, and we've also got I think it's a works plate there. I'd guess that that's something like built, then the year, and then underneath is the works. Is that Swindon? I can't actually read on the camera. Front buffer beam we've got picked out in this red. Again, more of a satin red. It really does look good. And more of those sprung-loaded turned brass buffers. The number application 92203 is crisp and even. We've got the 9F power designation there at the top. And moving along to the front, whilst you do get some etched nameplates in the detail pack, the actual printing of that black print does seem to be clear and clean. And certainly for many modelers, I wouldn't really want to go to the extra effort of applying etched nameplates. I think this is fairly reasonable on its own. However, if you do apply the etched nameplates, then these are best applied with a tiny amount of PVA glue, which gives some extra time to be able to position it and can be wiped off. Use the printed nameplates as a guide for exactly where the new one should go. The chimney on the top has the twin exhaust ports on the top and captures the very characteristic shape of the 9F really well. Short and squat. We've got the lip around the top, and certainly this does look a really great representation of the classic 9F chimney shape. Looking along the running plate, we've got that exquisite pipework detail again, and also these additional features as per the prototype. I particularly like the representation here of the bracket that the Welshot's valve gear hangs off. This is realised really well, and again, another classic feature of the 9F. We can also see just inside there the additional detail and correct shape of the chassis, with the rivet detail, the joggling, and also some of the lubrication pipes running in there too. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk. Running the model on DC on the rolling road, it performed perfectly well out of the box. It was really smooth, even down to low speeds in both directions. There was no sign of juddering or cogging. Firebox flicker effect on DC comes on from quite a low voltage and stays on right the way up. It doesn't actually get too bright either. It seems to have some kind of circuitry that means that it comes on early and stays on at fairly uniform brightness. I'm going to now do the DCC fit on the model, and for this you're going to need a Tramfabriek 21-pin decoder. We've got a link to the Tramfabriek website, who are the UK stockists of the full Tramfabriek range. To get into the model, all we need to do is make use of a small Phillips style screwdriver. And I'm just going to be a bit careful because both locomotive and tender are joined together. There is a temptation to undo these screws, but according to the paperwork we don't need to touch any of those. Instead, we're looking for these two fairly deep holes just at the back, and I'm just going to feel down into there, and you can feel when your screwdriver is onto the heads. Don't go too gung-ho. You really don't want to round these heads because you will make it impossible to get the body on and off your model. So you'll feel when it slots down into that crosshead, and then a small amount of tension there, and you can just feel it suddenly give. If you're really struggling, one tip is actually try and just put a little bit more tightness into it. I know that sounds counterproductive, but actually tightening it ever so slightly, it's almost like it cracks the seal, and then it's easier to undo, if that makes sense. So there we are, we've got both of these screws out, and then tilt the tender body up and slide it back that way. There's actually just a little tiny clip here on the front which is locating the tender top, and there does actually appear to be two other little clips as well. Looking inside, there's actually a lot of room. Even though we've got that fully modelled coal chute, the BR1G tender is quite frankly huge. There's a lot of space in there, and because it's quite high, we don't have too much of a protrusion into the location. You can see here the speaker location ready set up to go with HM7000, and that is a standard sized speaker socket. Now the blanking plate here is installed what most people would consider upside down. Actually, the NMRA standards allow for the 21-pin socket to be either way up depending on space, and I guess this is actually about just raising the circuitry up so that we've got a little bit more space and separation away from any of these solder points. So just remembering that we've lifted this off upside down, it is a standard 21-pin blanking plate, but we're just going to have to be careful and orientate the decoder the same way round. Now I'm just going to get our 21-pin Tramfabriek decoder, and we've got to install that in the upside down position as well. Now you'll still see we've got the locating pin here at the end, and that does match up. You can see here where we've got the locating pin. Make sure that everything lines up. It can be just a little bit trickier. Look down the side and just make sure that you're not forcing this on one pin over, and then just very, very gentle pressure. If you're having to force it, you've got it lined up wrong, and that will just slide down neatly. In fact, you can just see the ends of the pins coming back up and through. And we've got loads and loads of space in here for a sound installation, for a HM7000 installation. If you want to stay alive, there is more than enough room for that. Once we've got that in, you can check it like this on the programming track just to be certain, or if you're confident like me, you can just slot the front of the tender in first. You'll feel that locate, and then just get the rear of the tender to go down. You don't want any gap along the running plate, and then it's a case of turning it over and then screwing it back together. Once you've got the tendered body screwed back down, then you're ready to head off to the programming track, where the address of the decoder is by default number 3, and you can change it to a number that better suits your numbering scheme. When it comes to running, the model performed really well on Weir Yard, taking in all of the complex and, in some cases, quite badly laid track work within its stride. That included often challenging scissors crossings, as well as some tighter curves, and one particular area that I put it to the test was the transition between gradients. I did wonder whether a long wheelbase locomotive like this might kind of strand itself in the air, but there was no bother, both cresting from an uphill gradient to the level and also transitioning through the other way as well. It just took it all within its stride. When it came to pulling power, the model really was fairly well unstoppable, taking on some quite long and heavy trains as if they almost weren't there. Running light locomotive, I checked its slow speed ability, getting it right down to a crawl. There was a couple of tight spots evident, and this is something that is apparent when you run it down a grade, light locomotive, and it appears almost as a kind of surging. But the more I run it, the less it seems to be doing this, so I think it's something that with a degree of running in, the model would only get better, and indeed manufacturers do recommend a period of running in before the DCC fitting process, and I think in this case the model would have performed reasonably well with it. All in all, the performance was pretty good, and the only area that I might really fault is the fact that that firebox flicker is permanently illuminated on DCC when there is power to the locomotive, whether it's moving or not. I ran through all of the different functions on DCC, and there isn't any way to turn it on and off, and this does seem to have been a little bit of a missed opportunity by Hornby, that they could have used one of the 6 usually auxiliary functions available on most 21-pin decoders. But overall, this is a really nice performance from a model that really didn't seem to have any issues, even over badly laid track, and there didn't seem to really be any need for a stay alive in the model, as it just kept going. There was no stuttering, even on areas where I had insel frog points and parts of the track work that are notorious for having small dead spots. So we turn now to the scores, and first up is the build quality. And actually, by and large, this was pretty well put together. It feels like a lot of thought has gone into the materials used, and there's a lot of use of metal in this, which makes it really heavy. And I really like this use on things like the cab roof to get a really good scale thickness. There were only 2 areas that I could really fault. Firstly, there's a crack in one of the pipes just in front of the cab that I pointed out during the review that I wasn't sure whether it was cracked and then glued back together. And as far as I can tell, looking at it very closely, it does appear that the detailing part has been cracked, then glued. But it is very minor, and I had to really hunt to make my mind up on that. The other area was the back of the coal chute in the tender, where there's this divider board just in front of the dome, and I found that this cracked free with handling. It was an easy enough fix with a little bit of super glue, but it did feel like not enough had been used during assembly at the factory. But these are 2 very minor areas, so I'm going to give it a 9.8. Next up is running quality, and here is where this model really does shine. With all of that metal that's gone into its construction, it really does have a lot of grip, and I mean that. It just romped away with every single train that I ran it with here on Weir Yard, took in the gradients, and even some of the more challenging track work, such as the scissor crossing, which I made a long time ago. It's soldered together out of various cut down lengths of Pico track. and it can prove to be quite a challenge to a lot of rolling stock and locomotives, but this locomotive really did take it in its stride. It did seem to stutter a little bit when running light locomotive downgrade on very low power, and it does feel like there's a couple of tight spots just in the mechanism, but with running these are starting to smooth themselves out. So all in all, it's a good performance, and I'm going to give it a 9.9. Next up is DCC fitting and innovation. And I was quite pleased with how simple it was to get into the tender, and there's plenty of space for that 21-pin decoder. I like the fact that Hornby have finally started to move away from 8-pin sockets in locomotives, as the 21-pin is not only a lot neater, but it provides for more functionality natively out of the box without needing any intervention by the user. The actual socket itself has been mounted what most modelers might consider upside down, but this is still within the NMRA standard, and it does make sure that components on the decoder can't come into contact with any of the exposed components on the circuit board, and it's just little bits like this that show a lot of thought has gone into it. There's plenty of space inside the tender, and we also get that speaker enclosure that comes factory fitted, which ensures that if you go down the route of sound fitting, that it's really easy to get the speaker in place. And there's a 9F sound file available on the HM7000 range, and this locomotive will easily include space not only for that, but for a power bank as well. If you're not going to go down the sound route, then I've used a Trainomatic 21-pin decoder, and if you want to add one of Trainomatic's Stay Alives to that, then actually I found that the speaker enclosure was a really great place to tuck in some of the excess wire and circuit boards and keep everything nice and neat and simple, and certainly there are plenty of places to add in anything that you want in there. The Firebox flicker is a great addition, but I do wish that Hornby would add functionality to this. On DCC, it would be great if it could be activated on one of the auxiliary functions, and that would add a lot to locomotive, because they wouldn't run with the Firebox doors open all the time, and whilst it is a nice neat feature, it does feel that it was a missed opportunity to not have some degree of functionality on that. But overall, it's an easy DCC fit, and I'm going to give it a 9.0. We turn now to accuracy and quality of finish, and I really did like the satin finish that Hornby has used on this model. Once again as well, use of metal really does look better, and I say it time and time again that it's really hard to make painted plastic look like painted metal, but very easy to make painted metal look just like painted metal, because it is, and it is a lovely finish on this model. There's a lot of separately picked out detail too. The pipework is exquisite, and despite the fact we had a slight crack and factory gluing on the manifold of pipework on the top of the boiler, it didn't really mar the finish, and it really is a great addition to this model, picked out in that gunmetal, and the fact that separately fitted parts really does make it look something special. The pipework in copper colour as well, just below the cab, really is nicely done. This is an area on previous versions of the 9F, going back to the 1970s, have been somewhat lacking, with often a solid moulded piece. With this, it feels like it could almost be genuine pipework that's all threaded in there, and it really does look good. And it hasn't compromised the actual durability of it as well. One of the other areas that I noted in the review is that the tyres and connecting rods are chemically blackened, and that's maybe something that the picture on the box doesn't quite do justice to. It looks great in person, as you can see on the screen. So all in all, I'm going to give this a 9.5. Finally, we come to value for money. And this model is quite expensive with an RRP of £269.99, but it is a new, all fully tooled from scratch model that owes nothing in its heritage to any of the previous Hornby 9Fs. It really is a no expense spared model, and it does feel that way when you hold it with all that weight, all the die-cast metal, and a lot of separately fitted parts. Having actually assembled a Hornby new tooled Black 5, I understand just how many subtle parts go into these, and when you know that and you look deep, it really is exquisite just how many separately fitted parts there are in this model to really make it look good. We do have a link down below that takes you to TMC, the Model Centre, where it's available at a discounted price of £242.99. That is still quite an expensive model, but you do get a lot for that, and that's the way prices are going. It's something that we can't really shy away from, and it also must be remembered that compared to Continental models, these are actually still quite a bargain price by comparison. So I'm going to give this a 6.0, and that gives us a final score of 44.2. It's a respectable score for an exceptional model. You might have thought before this turned up on the market that really there wasn't much need for a new tooled 9F. But when you see and feel and run this model in person, it really is something special. It takes the finesse and quality of the 9F to another level that we've not seen ready to run in 00 gauge before, and this is definitely a model that will continue to stand the test of time. Sure, there are a couple of areas that I identify that Hornby could make some improvements, but overall it's not much that's needed to make this an absolutely exceptional model, and it's definitely worth the price tag that it's on offer for. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video. If you did, do please hit that like button and share this video as well to social media. It's a great way of keeping your fellow modelers up to date. And if you haven't already done so, do please subscribe to the channel. It's a good way of not only helping us out, but making sure that you're kept up to date on all of the video content that we produce. We upload every single Friday pre-recorded video. It's also the weekly Monday Club, your online model railway club, where you can meet and mingle and chat with your fellow modelers. That's 7 PM UK time every single Monday. We've also got a link down below that takes you to TMC, where you can find the model featured today at what we believe to be the best price available. And finally, I would love to hear from you in the comments section down below, particularly anybody who's got one of these new tooled Hornby 9Fs. What are your real world experiences? How well does it perform on your layout? What do you think about it? And most importantly, does it deserve the accolade of the definitive 00 gauge 9F model? I'd also like to hear from anybody, perhaps you spotted something that I missed in the review. Now, these models are incredibly well detailed these days, so sometimes the odd little bit does slip through, but you can point that out and keep your fellow modelers up to date. Share your knowledge and experience in the comments down below. Do also check out our full merch store. We got that down just underneath the video. You can also check us out over on Patreon. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at Tramfabriek.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model 00 gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest logo.
Today's video is sponsored by TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for finding all of the models featured today at the best possible price at the link in the description. TMC also offers custom weathering and renumbering to any model, be it brand new or pre-owned. Check out their full pre-owned listings too, where you can be assured of quality as every item is screened and graded by professional staff. TMC, the Model Centre, your first choice for all aspects of modelling. I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/JenniferKirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.